Hi, this is Pat McDonald, your host for Vote for Vermont, where our tagline is listening beyond the soundbite. Tonight, I'm turning the studio over to Deb Billado, who's the chair of the Vermont GOP. Deb has some guests with her whom she will introduce to you. And before I do that, though, I want to make sure that those in the Democratic and Progressive Party know that my studio is available to them if they want to put on a show, send a message out to the viewers around the state. Just give me a call or email me at voteforvermont@gmail.com. Without any further ado, I'd like to turn the show over to Deb Billado. Take it away, Deb.
First, I'd like to say thank you to Pat McDonald for letting us use her space for this evening's panel discussion. Tonight we have the Vermont GOP leaders, if you will, in terms of running the campaigns for the GOP for 2020 elections with us in the room tonight. We have Rob Roper from Water Cooler and Paul Dame, who's the political director of the Vermont GOP. This was a very interesting year for elections, and to say the least. And so we'd like to just have a panel discussion on what we know and what we think we know and where we think we're headed. So let me just open up by introducing the people on the panel here. My name is Deborah Billado. I am the GOP chairwoman of the Vermont GOP, and we have Paul Dame. Paul, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Paul Dame. I served as political director this year for the Vermont Republican Party. I'm also a former state rep. I was elected in 2014 for Essex Junction. And so it was really fun this year to be a part of somebody else's campaign instead of my own, and be able to bring the experience I had as a candidate to help first-time candidates.
And Rob Roper?
So I'm Rob Roper. I'm president of the Ethan Allen Institute. And the Ethan Allen Institute, basically, we focus on issues in the state, mostly with regard to finance, tax policy, energy policy, and basically a lot of the candidates reached out to us for help over this campaign with questions about some of these policies, and it's interesting to see them go. I'll also mention that from 2007 to 2009, I had your job as chairman of the Vermont Republican Party, so a lot of what I'll be saying tonight will be wearing that old hat a little bit as well from a political standpoint as opposed from the Ethan Allen Institute standpoint.
Good. Welcome, both of you. Your voice is very valuable here. I know that over the last year or so, we all worked very closely as a team. We were three of many people involved in the success of the GOP in the 2020 election here. And I'd like to just maybe review some of the election results and things that we know from the months of hard work that have been done. I'd like to talk about the gains, the victories, and the noteworthy races. Paul, were there any surprises in this election season?
Yeah, I don't know if there were some surprises. I think there were a lot of important wins. Usually Republicans heading into a presidential year here in Vermont, historically it's been a kind of environment where we lose seats. And I think it was really encouraging this year to see that we picked up seats. Instead of being, down 2, down 6, we were actually a net 4. So we had 2 seats that were held by Republicans that we lost, but then we had 6 other seats where we had new Republicans take over a seat that was held by someone else. So I think that was really encouraging on the House side. Then in the Senate, we picked up a seat from that was held by a Democrat who was running again. So it's the first time in 20 years that Vermont Republicans have picked up seats in the House and the Senate in the presidential year. I don't think that was necessarily a surprise for us because we had some really good candidates who were working really hard, doing all the things that they needed to do. The biggest part of that is getting out into their community, talking to people, listening to the focus and the concerns of their neighbors, and being able to incorporate that into what they were presenting about what they wanted to do in Montpelier. And it's never a surprise when that formula leads to success.
Thank you, Paul. So for me, it wasn't just the number of seats that we picked up, it was the seats that we picked up that was extremely important to me this year. Would you agree with that, Rob? And could you give us your analysis of that?
Yeah, well, just to jump on something Paul said before, this was a weird election year because of COVID, because of we went to an all-mail, well, not all-mail balloting, but we mailed the Secretary of State was given basically dictatorial powers over the election. He decided that we were going to mail a live ballot to everybody on the voter checklist, regardless of whether or not they requested one or not. We didn't know how the pandemic was going to affect how people were going to vote, how people would be able to campaign. So when you say, were there any surprises? I mean, from my perspective, everything was a surprise. It's remarkable that, as Paul pointed out, in a presidential year, which traditionally doesn't bode well for Republicans on the down ticket, in a year where there was record turnout, another factor that tends not to benefit Republicans down ticket, Republicans managed to pick up seats for the first time in a long time, and there were a lot of close races where it could have gone either way. You could have picked up some more. So nothing would have surprised me, and everything surprised me in this election. But to your point again, yes, the seats that the Republicans managed to pick up, knocking out the Speaker of the House, Mitzi Johnson, pending a recount, but it looks like 19 votes is a pretty solid lead in a recount based on my experience. And the leader of the Progressive Caucus was another important pickup for the Republicans. When you combine that with the fact that Senate President Pro Tem Tim Ashe, a progressive from Burlington, lost his bid in a Democratic primary for lieutenant governor. The lieutenant governor, David Zuckerman, lost monumentally to Governor Phil Scott. So the lieutenant governor, a progressive, is gone. The Senate President Pro Tem is gone. The Speaker of the House is gone. The leader of the Progressive Caucus is gone. That means that there's a lot of leadership holes at the top that are going to be filled by new faces. And what that means, we don't know. I mean, certainly they're going to, I would suspect they would be filled by people who have experience in the legislature, but they won't have experience in those roles as leaders. So there's going to be a learning curve, particularly in that first year. So what that means for policy, a little bit remains to be seen.
And I think in addition to that, you have Governor Scott returning with a complete mandate, one of the highest spreads we've seen in the gubernatorial race in a number of years. So the Democrat and Progressive coalition has had their hand weakened. Leadership has been completely eliminated. They're trying to refigure that out. On the other side, you've got Governor Phil Scott has got his mandate. He's coming back as probably certainly the most popular politician in Vermont, in the Vermont elections, and he's got a couple more Republicans to back him up on his veto. So I think just from a negotiating standpoint moving forward, it really puts a lot more power into the governor's office and with the House caucus, because now they only need 2 or 3 independents or 2 or 3 of the more centrist Dems to be able to enforce the policy that Governor Scott wants to see.
Well, that's another dynamic that's going to be interesting to watch. Is a lot of there aren't very many traditional blue dog Democrats in Vermont anymore. They tend to be fairly left. But the few that were there, Cynthia Browning from Manchester, Arlington, she lost her seat in a prime. Well, she ran as an independent, but she was sort of knocked out by her own party. Chris Bates is another one who would occasionally vote with Republicans, decided not to run for re-election again. The folks who fill these seats, Sam Young, was one. Although I think his reputation for being a moderate was probably overblown. I don't recall him ever really voting with Republicans on a major issue. But the person who replaced him in that seat is much more liberal than he was. Similarly, I would say for the seat that it was held in the Hyde Park Wolcott district. So you're going to see fewer opportunities for Republicans to pick up those 1 or 2 Democrats. They may not need them, but they need all of the independents, because right now there's 46 Republicans, which means that they need 5 to get to 51 to sustain a veto, which means they need all 5 independents. And some of those independents are reliable Republican allies, and some of them are, it's a flip of a coin.
So some people believe that our successes were based on the everyone gets a ballot in the mail process that the Secretary of State's office put out this year. I believe that our successes were based on hardworking candidates. All of the candidates that I know that won worked extremely hard, and they went door to door, which might have been against the mindset of many political candidates. They weren't going to door. So what would you say to those that suggest that we won because of the mailings versus the hardworking candidates?
Well, I mean, I don't know that, as Rob mentioned before, there's just so many variables, so many different things going on in this election. I don't think you can pin it on any one thing. I do think that the Republican Party had much stronger, more unified messaging this year. For the first time that I can remember, we ran a number of radio commercials that really connected down-ticket Republicans to Governor Scott's message of economic recovery, focusing on affordability. And that was something that we saw across the board. So that was something new that we hadn't done before, so we were able to connect our down-ticket Republicans to supporting Scott's agenda. I think COVID certainly played a factor in there. I think, as you mentioned, we had candidates who worked hard. They had the message that resonated with the people that lived in their district. I think that probably gets a lot more credit. But at the same time, we can look at the universal mail-in ballot and say it didn't hurt those candidates who were working hard doing the right things.
Yeah, I would say, who knows? It probably was a factor. I mean, oftentimes you hear Republicans say, well, they don't vote. They're frustrated. They think that their vote doesn't matter. And, it can be a pain when you go down there and spend your, morning waiting in line to fill out your ballot. Now it was just there. So there very well could have been a factor that a lot of Republican disenfranchised voters decided that they were going to vote this year. And generally, I think, giving credit where it's due, I think the Democrats, traditionally for the past several cycles at least, have had a much stronger get-out-the-vote machine than Republicans did. So were they able to, sort of squeeze more votes out of that towel? Maybe a few, but there was more low-hanging fruit in that situation for Republicans than I think for the Democrats.
Do you think that some of the national messaging filtered down and had an effect on the state level, such as defund the police and other issues that were going, the messaging that we kept hearing up here was coming down to here? Do you think that had an effect on the...
I really don't know. I look at that message. When I was going back and forth on election night between the Secretary of State maps, between Governor Scott, Donald Trump, and Scott Milne, and I was looking at some of those districts where Trump was doing really well and Scott Milne was doing really well, and then you go and you look at the legislative race and that legislator's not doing well. So I don't think that there was really a particular message that people were responding to up and down the ticket. I think that was I think they had a very individualized perception of the governor, a very individualized perception of the president, and a very individual perception of the other down-ticket races. One thing I will say about the down-ticket races that is discouraging, if you look, they say we had this huge turnout, but when you look at the number of blank ballots for down-ticket races for House and Senate, and by what I mean by a blank ballot is somebody elected not to vote in that race. It's a lot. It's like 14, 15, 20% of the people who cast a ballot for president or somebody on that ticket didn't vote for those races. And that's where I think early voting and mailing that ballot out to everybody early hurt a lot of challengers, because you're all excited to vote for the president or to vote against the president. You get your ballot in the mail, you're, I'm going to do it. And you fill that thing out and you get down to the, who is this? Oh, I don't know. And you stuff it in. So we really have to look at voter participation in the different tiers. Yes, we had high voter turnout for the presidential election. We didn't have that high turnout for lower tier races. And that's something I think we need to work on in the future. As a state, I mean, we need to, everybody, no matter who you're voting for, Republican, Progressive, Democrat, Independent, people should know who those candidates are and make an informed decision. And I don't think they had the opportunity so much this time around.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah, I think sometimes, conventional. I've heard other legislators who've been in, longer than me say, "Oh, yeah, I don't start campaigning till Labor Day." Well, if you held to that view, there were votes already coming in, before you really started your campaign. So that's one of the things we worked with, especially on our newer candidates, saying, if you've heard that, you've got to throw that out the window, because we had a good percentage, at least a third of the ballots were in after about 2 weeks of them going out. Mm-hmm. So to the degree that candidates were on top of the ball and were doing that, and so I know, Mike Morgan and Sally Akey, who won their seats, those were people who were campaigning, at least by January. So they had started rolling. Folks who waited a little bit longer were victim to exactly what Rob was talking about. If they didn't get their campaign up and running, people were voting in September. And if you waited too late to start, you missed out on that opportunity.
How do we account for 14,000 blank votes on the lieutenant governor election? That's a lot of blank ballots.
It is, and I'll point out we had great turnout for president and governor, but those down ticket ballots, I don't know. I don't know what possesses somebody not to vote, because I think people knew who Molly Gray was.
That's a pretty high level seat not to have.
Yeah, it's a high level seat, and a lot of people. I think people knew who Molly Gray was. I think people knew who Scott Milne was. I can't account for not voting in that race, other than they just didn't care. Lieutenant governor. What does a lieutenant governor really do? I don't know. I'm mad at Trump and I'm going to vote for Biden, or MAGA, I'm voting for Trump, and I think that they were done.
Good. Okay. So what do you think moving forward here is our message from the Republican Party? Paul, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I think it goes to that old saying, you got to dance with who brung you. And the message that we had going into this election was focusing on economic recovery post-COVID. And so that's what worked for us in a year where the odds were kind of stacked against us. So I think Republicans need to continue having that approach, focusing on rebuilding our economy, figuring out how to have as much economic activity as we can do safely. And I think that's one of the things that people have appreciated about Governor Scott. You see, governors across the country are sort of in lockdown, hide, and we're not going to do anything. Stop what you're doing. And Governor Scott has had a much more middle of the road approach, saying we need to put in some protocols to make sure everyone's safe. But our goal is to let's have as much economic activity as we can. That despite some of the restrictions he's put out, that's always been his goal, to be pushing that, letting people work. I mean, if you're providing food for your family based on your job, that's an essential job. And I think Governor Scott's background in his private sector job and the kinds of people that he's employed has given him a connection to blue collar Vermonters that a lot of governors in other states don't have. And that's what's helped him to focus on, let's get people working as soon and as quickly as possible. Even when we had, when we were sort of on a total lockdown, just the idea of, all right, we're going to let work crews of 2 people get started. He wanted to figure out some way to get something going, and he did that. And so I think Republicans have to keep that same approach. What are we able to do to keep the economy running at whatever capacity we can, and what are the measures we need to put in place to make it easier for folks to do things. We've repealed a lot of restrictions in various formats to make it easier to get work done. And I think Republicans need to continue to work with Governor Scott to roll that kind of stuff out as we move forward into this session.
Yeah, I agree with Paul. I think that the Republicans' future is a party of working people. There was an interesting article by Senator Marco Rubio on the national scale about exactly that. He said the Republican Party needs to rebrand itself as the party, as a multi-ethnic party of working Americans. And I think that that's equally true here in Vermont. I mean, I think when you look at the Democrat and the Progressive Party agenda, and I'll meld the two together because they really are becoming sort of two halves of the same party, it's very ideologically driven. It's not really grounded in the lives and problems faced by working people in their daily lives in the state. It's about we're going to save the planet from global warming, or we're going to ban plastic bags, or we're going to, they have very aspirational goals that are not really kitchen table agenda items. And I think that the opportunity for Republicans, and I think if Donald Trump showed anything in his election, is that his message resonates with working people. They want to make sure that they can keep more of the money that they earn. They want to make sure that there are more opportunities to expand their income or their job or their business, to hire more people. They want to be able to prosper. And Republicans can capitalize that. And I'll point on the multi-ethnic thing. This is a story that I shouldn't say I'm shocked because it doesn't fit the left-wing media narrative, but I'm shocked that at least somebody didn't find this interesting. In this era of Black Lives Matter, there were more people of color running under the Republican banner in Vermont than under the Democratic banner. You had Case Long, who was running for Senate in Chittenden County, and he lost a primary, but a gentleman named LeVar Cole was running for the House in Orange 1. You had Alice Flanders running for the House, an African-American woman down in Hartford. Meg Hansen, an Indian woman running for Senate in Bennington County. And I know there's somebody that I'm forgetting in that mix, but there were more people of color running as Republicans than there were as Democrats. Nobody picked up on that story. I mean, Digger didn't pick up on that story, or VPR. That would have been a fascinating story to ask people why, but I guess it doesn't fit, so the question didn't get asked.
Yeah, we saw that same trend happening nationally that Rob just highlighted. Vermont was a part of that national trend of more and more Republicans winning by running candidates who are from either women. We've got a record number of congressional Republican women, or candidates of color, or veterans. I mean, those were all the seats where we won. We had candidates who fit that description, and we also see from exit polls that nationally, Trump got a much higher percentage of Black and especially Latino votes compared to Cubans, especially when you even compare it against Mitt Romney and John McCain, our last couple candidates. So I think the Republican Party needs. We've got a few people who maybe haven't voted Republican before, and whether it's because of Trump or because of other things, they voted Republican or were willing to consider it this time. And the party needs to have an intentional effort to continue to reach out to all those new voters who are Republican for the first time, and make sure that we continue, we understand what the messaging was that worked, that brought them in, and to continue doing that.
Right. Yeah, that's good. I see the makeup of the Republican Party, not only in the state of Vermont, but also nationally. The makeup of that party is slowly changing. And I think Trump, whether he becomes our next president or our last president, I think he has a lot to do with bringing people into the fold, into the party. So
yeah, I think we've seen a realignment too. There are folks who were traditional Republican voters. I've got a good friend of mine who used to vote straight ticket Republican, who voted for Biden this year and was kind of a little bit more of a ticket splitter. And then, as I've been getting emails, you're running part of the state party's website, people emailing me, especially those working class, blue collar, sometimes even union members, saying, I've always voted Democrat and they haven't done anything for me. And we saw a lot of that blue collar electorate going towards Trump because of trade deals and this idea of American made. And I think the Republican Party has a unique opportunity to bring in those working class people. I feel like that's always been our message. I mean, I grew up on a dairy farm, so I've always felt like that's part of the Republican message. But this year, other working class people were hearing it and it was resonating with them. And we need to make sure that we continue to do that.
So it sounds like moving forward, we continue to press on with the economy, building the economy. But does it not feel like that every passing legislative session makes it a little more difficult for us to build the economy and create a better, stronger economy? What do you think the Democrats' message is moving forward?
Well, I think they have a different definition of affordability than Republicans do. Republicans, I think, Governor Jim Douglas was the one who sort of coined that idea, that concept of we need to make Vermont more affordable again. And I think Republicans think that affordable means that you can afford to live here within your means without any subsidies from the government or a program. That means that you have a good paying job. That means that you have a career path that's associated with that good paying job. That means that the housing prices aren't astronomical and you can't afford it. And the Democrats' vision of affordability is the government pays for everything for you. That's how you afford it, is that it's subsidized. So that's, I think, what their message is going to be, is that we're coming through COVID. You've taken a financial hit. We need to subsidize you in order to get you through the other side. Whereas I think Republicans are going to be, we need to generate genuine economic energy and growth through the policies that we put into place. And those are going to be competing messages and ideologies. For some, the Democrats is going to be more appealing. For others, the Republicans is going to be more appealing. And we have to make, I think, a moral case for why ours is the right direction to go. Not just a moral case, but a practical case, too. People complain about housing. I'm just going to talk about affordable housing for a second. Here in Montpelier, where we're filming this, they just put in a handful of units, and I was talking to the Republican minority whip, Rob LeClaire, about this. They put in quotes, affordable housing units that cost over $300,000 apiece. That's not affordable housing. That's expensive housing that is subsidized by the taxpayers for somebody who can't afford to live in it. And what Rob was saying is we just need something practical. Get some land that's a little bit outside of town. You can put up either smaller homes, but you can get a whole lot more people into a whole lot more units at a price that they can actually afford without us having to subsidize. But they don't allow it. Democrats don't allow that because sprawl. And they do want to have that sort of program. And you talk about the Global Warming Solutions Act. It's something we've been following, which is a big part of the Democratic agenda going forward. And Act 250 reform. Both of these things are going to make housing more expensive because both aspects of those bills incorporate new regulations that say you have to build a house or an office building or whatever to specifications that prove that it is carbon neutral over the life of the project. Well, that's a cost. It's going to cost more to build the house, which means that whoever buys that house has to pay more for it. That makes housing more expensive. So they're going to say that the subsidy needs to be bigger, which comes from a taxpayer, and that whole cycle continues. So these things need to be sort of explained to people, and I think that's sort of the job of the party to do, and also the people who are in the legislature.
Your thoughts, Paul, on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think what Rob mentioned is spot on. I see the Democrats continuing to double down on their messaging about things like the Global Warming Solutions Act, which is the exact opposite direction of, I think, the message that the voters sent to Montpelier. Is they're looking not for ideological activism, they're looking for good governance, practical, simple solutions. And what happens is the, in the model that Rob talked about is, right, we make housing more expensive and then we make the subsidy bigger. And then you just keep getting stuck in the cycle over and over and over again. It's not sustainable, which ironically is a buzzword that's used often by Democrats and progressive. It's just not fiscally sustainable. So I think getting back to some of those basics is a way that Republicans can demonstrate we want to achieve housing that is affordable, not this term called affordable housing, which implies that non-sustainable process that we just talked about. We just want to make housing that people can buy. It's that simple, and so I think there's opportunities for us to continue to do that and make that case. And if Democrats continue to go in the opposite direction, we're going to have more and more ground that we can pick up as people realize that the people that are actually the Democratic majority in Montpelier doesn't have the same practical concerns that your thrifty Yankee Vermonter does.
This affordable housing conversation, we could do a whole hour just on that alone. I find it very interesting that I'm a landlord for 34 years now, and in several counties, and I look at what the rents are going for, and we know that many jobs in Vermont are tied to the service industry. Mm-hmm. These are lower paying jobs, $13, $14, $15 an hour. And one-bedroom apartments in Chittenden County are going for $1,200 a month. I don't know how people are doing this. You basically have to live with other people in order to have an apartment away from mom and dad's house, and yet you still can't afford it. So I think this is an entire conversation for maybe another panel discussion that we have.
No, well, I'll tell you, one of the ways that you afford it is you move out of the city
Outside of
to
Chittenden County.
20 miles away, 30 miles away, and then you have a commute.
Yep.
And then the Democrats come in and they're going to hit you with the Transportation Climate Initiative tax, which hit you with 17 cents a gallon for your gas to get to and from work. So again, there's another messaging opportunity there to say, hey, look, they just don't understand or care about the problems that you're trying to deal with and the solutions that you're trying to affect in order to get by. They're just making it harder for you at every turn.
They are. And I would hope that most of the people that go to Montpelier are in touch with the people and their constituents, that they're not people that are living in the higher end means of life, and that they really understand who the voters and who the workers are in the state of Vermont that are renting these apartments. The legislative process in the COVID world moving forward here, how do you see this unfolding?
It's going to be very interesting coming up because the Vermont Constitution lays out a process about how we start the year. And I think even having been a member of the legislature, there's something special about being in that building, especially your first day in office. Taking your oath and choosing your seat in the legislature. And I don't know if any of that's going to happen or what that's really going to look like. I think also it's the sort of legislative process via Zoom has a couple silver linings. I do think that people can access things that are going on in committees a little bit easier in terms of a lot of that stuff is up online. But the downside is it's incredibly more difficult to actually engage with your representatives. When I was in the legislature, you could pick up the phone, call the sergeant at arms, give them a message, and they'd write it down. And usually within about 5 minutes, you had a page taking that message from the person, just record it, getting it right to your legislator almost immediately. When the legislature was voting on the Global Warming Solutions Act, I had to, I looked up and I sent an email to my legislator because that was the only thing that I had. And I remember when I was a legislator, if I had a hand-delivered pink slip, some kind of notification that somebody called, I got that immediately. The email was whenever I checked my email next. So I got to the bottom of the list, and I didn't get a response from my legislator for almost a month after the fact. So now maybe she read it the first time, but I didn't know that. So we missed that. We also don't get the opportunity, the people don't get a chance to go to Montpelier, see their legislator face to face. When there's a bill that affects them, they don't get to go there and lobby and engage with their legislator or with the committee the same way that they do. A lot of good constituent service comes from constituents coming, we'll have lunch, we'll meet outside, in between meetings, things like that. A lot of that integration and the engagement that legislators can have with the public is all gone. It's all being done via Zoom. And I don't think the citizens get a chance to interject themselves and involve themselves in the process the same way. I'm willing to bet, we've got 150 people, in the House. I bet anytime you go into Costco, there's more than 150 people there. So it seems like there are a lot of other essential services that are still happening, and we need to figure out a way to be able to get the legislature back in person. And there's just more public transparency that way. You get to a case where if the Democratic caucus, who constitutes a majority, is getting to have sort of offline secret meetings that the public doesn't get access to, it's a little bit harder to do that. When we were in person, the caucus would meet in the building in public. Any person who was there could walk in. They knew it was happening. It was on the schedule. So in some ways, we have a little bit of a little more information, but there's also a loss of transparency and a loss of engagement with the process that we have right now.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Well, I actually like it more than Paul, it sounds like, because yes, I miss having the people in the building, because I do think that there is a value to being able to go in and sit in the cafeteria and chat in between meetings and, how you doing, how the wife and kids, and where'd you go for your vacation and all that stuff. And it's important. But a lot of the people that you're lamenting who no longer have that easy access are special interest lobbyists. And that's not a bad thing in my mind, because the average person isn't in that cafeteria. The average person maybe once a decade will get in their car and drive down there as part of either a pro-life thing or a pro-Second Amendment thing. They'll go in there and they'll be given a ticket and say, go talk to your legislature, and they'll find their legislator. But for the most part, the people who are in that building are hardcore lobbyists with an agenda that they are paid to put forward, and they're going to go after the legislature. And what's going to be interesting to me is this new crop of legislators coming in particularly in regard to the majority of the party. They're never going to have that moment where the old guard puts their arm around them and takes them into the shed and tells them the way what's what. They're going to be at home with their constituents. They're not going to be in Montpelier at the Capitol Plaza Hotel hanging out in the J. Morgan's bar. After the things, they're going to be, in their kitchen with their families, or they're going to be at the grocery store or the drugstore in their local town. And the people that they're going to be hearing from after they finish up on the legislative Zoom floor are going to be their constituents. And I think that that's going to have a positive effect. The other thing that I like about having Zoom, and I hope when eventually everybody does come back, Zoom still remains a factor, because it's so much better to have these committee hearings and the floor arguments recorded. They weren't in the past. I mean, if you wanted to know what was being said in a committee room, when they're debating the Global Warming Solutions Act and they're bringing in all the left-wing activists in order to testify, and they're not letting anybody else, you think Twitter's bad? About Facebook's bad about blocking out conservative content? Try getting through a committee chair, a Democratic committee chair, to make your point known on if it's not part of the narrative that they want in the testimony. Now people can see that, and if you missed it, you can go back and you can see and you can watch the recording. Because if you're not, it used to be you have to be in the room. Like 20 people can fit in that room with 2 people on each windowsill, 1 person sitting on the radiator, 3 people standing up in front of the door, and the rest of the seats packed in. If you weren't one of those people, you didn't know what was going on. But now you can. And the other thing is, you could be sitting there trying to take notes and somebody says something absolutely crazy. You're like, did they really say that? I don't know if they say that. And you have to sort of jot it down from memory. Now you go back and say, yep, they really said that crazy thing. In fact, here it is. In fact, I'm going to take that clip and I'm going to put it up on YouTube so everybody can know that this person said that crazy thing. Or, contrarily, made a really good argument that the press doesn't pick up. I mean, that was a huge frustration on a lot of issues with Republicans, is they would make great arguments for or against legislation on the floor, and the press would never, quote them. They'd never even bring up that part of the argument. And I've heard press people say, well, I mean, they're not going to win the vote, so who cares what they have to say? And that's, I think that it's actually good. There's bad parts to it, but I think the positives that are coming from it are going to be much greater than the negative.
Well, I think there's a way to incorporate everything that Rob said, about the, the distribution of the content of what's happening in committee meetings, the accountability that comes with recordings. We can do all that stuff in an in-person setting. So I think we can get the best of both of those worlds. The question is there going to be the appetite for that? I think that Republicans, for all the reasons that Rob just mentioned, would want to move forward in that. We want more transparency, more access to people, because we know the arguments we're making, and they don't always get out there. But at the same time, there's a lot that can get lost in the in-person, without the in-person
Without the
stuff.
in-person, yeah. I think the human dynamics is missing in the, this is my own, and you both make really good points, is missing in the Zoom meetings. And I wonder what's not being said because of the Zoom meetings. Who's holding back? Who's not interacting, free-flowing with their counterparts because it is a Zoom meeting? And how much of the Zoom meeting is already pre-planned in terms of conversation? So I think there's some translation that's lost in there. So I think between the two, there, we could come up with a better solution.
I mean, and it'll be interesting to see as we get into the new session. We've only had the Zoom meeting in this COVID era, where all, and there was sort of an unwritten agreement that we're going to restrain what the legislature is really going to take up. I don't know if we really stuck to that restriction, but that was the idea anyways. Now when we get a brand new session and the door's wide open, I don't know if that having a large breadth of possible considerations is going to work with Zoom. Because I think most of the things that were happening on Zoom, everybody knew there's one big thing coming up this week. We weren't doing as many things at the same time as we would do in a regular in-person session. Because I know for me as a legislator, sometimes you really got up to speed on a bill that your committee wasn't working on because you were talking to somebody else in that committee at lunch. And it helped you as a legislator get a little bit more informed. Now, maybe those same things are still happening, but it requires a little bit more intentionality from the legislators.
And this may only be an issue for the next legislative session coming on, because I think Pfizer and Moderna are both 95% efficacy on their injections, and that may all be resolved by the end of this next legislative session. So we may be back to business as usual in the following legislative session, but in the meantime,
We'll see.
yeah, in the meantime. So, visions and goals for 2022. Paul, as political director, working with myself, what do you see in 2022?
Well, I mean, I like to aim high. I think we're not really doing our job if we're not shooting to win a majority in the House and the Senate. And I think the gains that we've picked up this year, get us a little bit better starting point for 2022 than we had previously. And I think we've seen, we had a number of races that came pretty close, within 40, 50 votes. So I think, and we had a lot of first-time candidates. And I think one of the things that's been encouraging for me this year is when I started the recruiting process, I had that conversation with just about every candidate to let them know, look, when I ran, I lost the first time. Bernie Sanders lost 5 times, in statewide races before he got elected to Congress. So setting the expectation up front that, hey, even if you lose the first time, don't give up. Unfortunately, we've had this kind of plague the Republican Party for years. We have really, really good, solid candidates who run once and come up short because they're running against an incumbent. And then they quit, they go home, and they don't come back. And already I've had conversations with folks who lost and have said, I'm already getting ready for 2 years from now. Mm-hmm. So I haven't looked at the whole picture, but I just get this sense, sort of anecdotally, we have more people already signed up for 2022 right now than we certainly did 2 years ago. So already we've got, so now we're starting with a larger number of candidates. We're starting with a larger number of candidates who have experience running. And we're, I think we're also going to be focused very heavily on those candidates who won a seat this year, who flipped the seat, making sure that we give them the support to continue to, really do the work required to reach out into their constituency, to connect with those people, to be building themselves up in that community, making sure they're responding to that community to help protect those seats as we move into 2022 as well. Mm-hmm. I think another thing, and I'm sure Rob can talk more about this, is we're going to have a new map. Now, I don't know what it's going to look like, but we just had the census, and that means reapportionment is coming up. So depending on the direction that goes, there may be some things in there where we've had seats that have been drawn up in a way to protect Democratic incumbents who aren't there anymore. And we could do it in a more even way. I think what's going to happen in Chittenden County is really important. We go from that 6-pack, the only district like it in the country. I would argue one of the most unfair districts in the nation. It looks like that's going to get split up. And I think that's helpful for Republicans to be able to represent those communities outside Burlington. They're different than Burlington, and they need different representation. I think Republicans are going to have a better opportunity there.
Yeah, and as well, I think generally in the midterms, we have a better shot at picking up. So if we keep the same momentum that we just did in 2020 here and apply that to 2022, I see success in 22. Rob, what are your thoughts?
It's really interesting because when I was chair, leading up to when I was chair and soon after I left being chair and during my stint, I sort of noticed this cycle that was like counterproductive for Republicans, is people would see in the off-year elections a handful of candidates maybe do well. So then they get excited and they run in the presidential year where it's much more difficult for Republicans to run, and then they get discouraged, and then they don't run, and so you get more people running in the presidential year when it's harder to run, and fewer people running in the non-presidential year when you have a better shot. So this year, I saw a lot of enthusiasm in the presidential year. I think, from your perspective, it came late. I think there were a lot of candidates that sort of got in at the last moment on the filing deadline, and even a number of candidates who got in after the filing deadline as appointees because there was no candidate in the race. And that's difficult, particularly in this year when 45 days out the ballots arrived and people started voting. That was a crippling disadvantage for a lot of first-time candidates. But the enthusiasm was there in this year. And as you said, if you can keep that enthusiasm through next year, then if you can break that cycle and get people on the right rhythm, then it's gonna bode well for the Republicans moving forward.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I did intentionally this year was recruit candidates. We had, I think for the first time in quite a while, every Republican in the state of Vermont had at least one Republican candidate they could vote for the legislature, either the House or the Senate, and in many cases both. So I think that right there, because it's hard to recruit people to run if they know year after year after year there's never any Republicans on my ballot. So places down in like Windham County or Windsor, sometimes even in Bennington. They're like, well, what's the point? Nobody ever runs, nobody can win. And a couple of those places we showed a Republican can come close. or there are Republicans in your. There's 10,000 of them. There's 15,000 of them, depending on the Senate seat. So I think that's material that we'll be able to go into those areas and recruit better, where we haven't, because like, well, how well could I do? I'm like, I don't know. We haven't had a Republican run in this district since we had it reapportioned, So now we've got some numbers we can go back to people with. So we started out with a larger recruiting class this year. And I think putting people on the ballots can help us, as Rob said, people that are going to run in 2 years are looking at the election results now. Now, maybe we haven't made that connection with them, but we will. And when we do, they've got a little bit more momentum coming with them, and I think we've got a chance to win seats that we haven't won before as well.
Great, good. Are there, Rob, do you want to talk about reapportionment just for a moment?
I can talk about it for a minute. I'm looking at the clock and we're running out of time,
7
and that's
minutes.
really a subject
Yep.
for almost an entire show. But basically what reapportionment is for the audience is every 10 years we have the census, and one of the major purposes of the census is to figure out how to redraw the district lines so that roughly the same number of people are represented by the same number of representatives. 10 years ago, I served on this board as well, and at that time, we wanted every district to have, I think it was 4,172 people in it, with a plus or minus variable of no more than 10% either way. Otherwise, you get into a constitutional mess. So we are in the process of that now. We're still waiting for the final counts for the census numbers. We are going to see a different map because while the overall population of the state is stagnant, the growth of certain regions of the state is very different. People have moved around a lot. There's a lot more people in Chittenden County and Franklin County. They've seen substantial population growth. The southern part of the state around Windham County and Brattleboro, some parts of Bennington and some parts of the Northeast Kingdom have seen their population shrink. So we need to be able to figure out how to set the lines so everybody has sort of one person, one vote, equal weight of the vote, or as close to it as we can. So that keep an eye out. I hope you can go to the Secretary of State's office and it's right on their reapportionment board. I hope people will follow along because this is an important thing. It's a big deal, and it's one that too many people don't pay attention to.
What does the Civil Board of Authority in each community have to offer?
Well, what we look for is input from communities on how, we try to maintain town lines. We could try to keep a district within a town. Sometimes that's not possible. Towns have to be split up. When that happens, we're looking at geographic lines. Is there a river? What are the economic ties? Is there an economic tie between this town and this town, or between this town and the other town? What are the school district lines? Do they share a school? Sometimes you look at a map that doesn't have the topographical stuff on it, and it's like, oh, look, these two communities, there's 2,100 in this community and 2,100 in this community. Let's put them together and make a district. It's perfect. Well, you don't notice that there's a mountain running down the middle of those two districts and no road. So you can't do that. So that's what we went. The Board of Civil Authorities and local chambers of commerce and all those groups. We're looking for input to say, look, we have a tie with this community, and those people over there are nice, but there's only a road that you can get to in the non-winter months, and it wouldn't make any sense for us to be connected with that group. Or they're nice over there, but we're in a school district with this town over here, so we'd prefer to be paired with that town if we possibly can be.
I think it was going to be interesting. One thing that we have this year doing reapportionment we didn't have 10 years ago is Front Porch Forum. So it'll be interesting. I don't know if you've gotten a map from them yet, because there you've built in that kind of community, and sometimes it's even broken down on smaller levels. So I was in Essex Junction. I think we had 4 or 5 Front Porch Forums within that. So it'll be interesting to see how some of the technology that has come about to connect communities or certain parts of communities together, if that gets incorporated in the new maps. So
that's interesting. I'll have to raise that with the group next time we meet. It might be interesting to have somebody from Front Porch Forum come in and give us a little bit of a
Because I know
their take.
I know they have a map somewhere. Because I think if you look at doing advertising, they show it. So it'd be interesting to see that as an
Yeah,
overlay.
I've seen them for Essex Junction.
Mm-hmm.
So the apportionment board approaches it from a logistical point of view, and how do these communities, does it get political when it reaches?
Well, I should have pointed this out when you asked about the board. We only make a recommendation. We're an advisory board. We don't have authority to impose these lines. We will put together a map and we will send it to the legislature, and the legislature will take it from there, and what their say is final. And once it gets to them, it becomes actually very political. Our instructions are that taking into account where incumbents live should be a factor, but it's not the number one factor. When it gets to the legislature, my experience last time was it becomes the number one factor.
So does it get approved by the House and then the Senate?
Yes,
that work?
it starts in the House and then it went to the Senate.
And then it goes to the Senate, and then it's, and then,
I'm pretty sure I remember that correctly,
and
but
then does the governor up or down it?
that's a good question.
I
I
think
think
he
he
would have
does,
to.
yes.
It's a bill,
It's a bill, so yeah.
Bill, good. Fascinating. Well, anything else you'd like to speak to? We have 2 minutes left. If not, we'll close. Paul?
I would just say, for anybody who's out there who's seen the results that the Republicans have had this year, who recognize that the Republican Party in Vermont is a party of working people looking to help people continue to expand their opportunities, wants to see economic growth, wants common sense solutions to things like housing that are genuinely fiscally sustainable. Get on our website, wvtgop.org, and there's still an opportunity. I'm taking applications right now for candidates for 22. And even if you're not sure what you're thinking about, do I want to run for select board? Do I run for House, for Senate? I don't even know what this means. Can I just talk to somebody and ask questions? Send those in, because I'll talk to you. And I've lost races, I've won races, and I've helped candidates in rural districts or in urban districts as well. It's never too early to start thinking. I think one of the big things is Mike Morgan, who beat Mitzi Johnson. He really started running. He never stopped running from his campaign
Right.
2 years ago. And I really believe that anybody who's willing to put in the work can beat anybody else out there.
Yep, that's actually, I was going to just quote Leland Morgan. He told me last week or so that anyone can win if they work hard enough. It may take you more than one cycle, but if you work hard enough, it's possible. And we certainly know, between the three of us, how many hours we put in over the past year or so. And it paid off. I feel really good about that. So with that being said, I'd like to thank you both for being here tonight. And
Thanks for having us.
yeah, I look forward to working with you. Thank you.